Welcome back. I'm David the Good, and I hope the background behind me looks suitably post-apocalyptic for a prepper video. Today we're going to talk about preserving food with one of the simplest methods ever devised by man: drying. Now, it's all well and good that you're growing your own food or you're hunting your own food. What happens though if you shoot a deer and you don't have a freezer? You better eat it quickly because it's going to spoil and it's going to make you sick. We often have this problem in our gardens. A whole bunch of tomatoes come in all at once, and what do? You give them all away, right? Well, what if it was important for you to have that food for your family? In that case, you're going to have to learn how to preserve it. Now, the first thing I would probably do for tomatoes was can them. But canning requires a stove, it requires jars, it requires a source of heat, and it requires you to balance things properly so you don't end up getting botulism. Canning is a little more intense. Drying is simple. Now, we're going to use drying if we don't have a freezer, because freezer is like totally simple. You jam it in bags, or you blanch it, which is where you put your produce into boiling water for a moment to stop the enzymatic reactions taking place so it freezes and preserves better and keeps its color and flavor. But we're not going to get into that. Drying is what you do when you basically have nothing, or if you want to preserve the value, the nutrition in that crop to a higher level than if you can. If you can, a lot of things are destroyed in the canning process because of the heat and boiling. But with drying, you actually preserve more of the vitamin and mineral content. It doesn't get lost in the water that you're canning in, or the sauce that you're cooking, or whatever else. So drying is actually a really good option. Now, in order to dry, if you want to go for the easy way to dry, that would be buying a dehydrator. I've owned a few different dehydrators over the years. I've had some of the inexpensive, I think they're called Nesco dehydrators, and they worked great. They're the circular type with the little plastic sheets. One fits over the other. You cut your produce up into little manageable chunks, maybe 3/8 of an inch thick or so, and you lay them out on the little trays, and you start it up, and you set your heat level from quite warm, like 140 degrees, or down to 95 degrees, and you just let the breeze blow through there and warm them, and overnight they pretty much are dry, and you just scrape them off at that point, and you put your dried pieces into jars and seal them, or you put them in bags and seal them, because you don't want the moisture coming back in because it will spoil, and you're done. It's easy. You could go more expensive. You could get yourself an Excalibur, which is like one of those big, awesome square things that costs a few $100 or more. Those are seriously great, but those are expensive. So, I don't have an Excalibur budget, so I don't have an Excalibur. Now, the really simple way to dry is to use the sun and the wind. There are more complicated ways of doing this, which are really cool. Like Paul Wheaton, the permaculture guy who runs permies.com, he did a video showing off different solar dehydrators that people have made. And you've probably, if you've ever looked it up online, you'll see where they have a solar collector box that's painted black and it's got glass on it, and the warm air runs up through a couple of screens, and then you've got your stuff sitting on the screens, and there's a cover to it and all that kind of thing. And I've done some of those, but they generally take a while to do. And I just really I don't like to build stuff if I can help it. So the other easy way to do it is to take some screening. If you can get some food grade like stainless steel, that's really good. But I've also just taken, you can just take like stainless steel pans and go set them in the sun and spread out some things cut thinly, laid out on top of that stainless, and it'll work. Bits of steel is non-reactive, so you have a bit of steel like grating or something like that. You can put it out. If you have a porch that gets some breeze and gets some sun, but the rain doesn't fall on it, the rain is really your big enemy when it comes to drying. I remember trying to dry a whole bunch of blueberries in this little solar dehydrator thing I had tried to build, and I kept having to bring it inside because it didn't have enough of a cover on it, and if it got rained on, it was made out of cardboard, it would have been ruined and my blueberries would have spoiled. So there's a lot of problems if you don't have it dry fast enough. The big thing with drying is getting things dry fast enough. The reason drying is such an excellent form of food preservation is that when something is dried, bacterial and fungal action pretty much comes to a halt because it needs water to survive. So think of the mummies in Egypt. They were preserved in the desert for a very long period of time after they had a drying process, and then they had an embalming process, which obviously you probably don't want to do with your food. And then they sat in very dry areas. I mean, they've still got cloth and paper and other goods that are thousands of years old that were not destroyed because they are in a very dry climate. The same is true of Chile's Atacama Desert, where they have found mummies still in an excellent state of preservation, and basically they just buried them in the desert and they were preserved for long, long periods of time because without the moisture, decay does not take place. So you want to get the moisture out as quickly as possible so your food doesn't mold over, and you also want to protect it from flies and insects while it's drying. So if you have a little bit of a screening, you can cover it over with some other screening. Now I don't worry about that if I'm doing something like drying herbs. I just find a sunny spot, or let's take a look at my favorite place to dry herbs. This is some tobacco leaves that I am drying on the dashboard of my car right now. And they've only been up there for one day and they are totally crispy dry. Your car heats up and the rain doesn't come into it, hopefully. And you crack the windows and it heats up and the moisture is coming out of those windows, and it's just like a big dehydrator. So your car is an awesome dehydrator. If you have a car, use it as a dehydrator. Spread stuff out inside of it and just let the sun do the rest of it. Drying is one of those methods that is so simple that anybody can do it. So long as you have a very dry, sunny spot, a windy, sunny spot. If you have a dry season, use your dry season for drying. When it's the rainy season where I live, you can't dry a thing to save your life. I would have to stick it on racks in the stove or use a dehydrator to dry it and then bag it up or jar it up so it doesn't spoil. But in the dry season, you know, as fall comes on hopefully and you're bringing your harvest in and it's starting to get drier, if you've got that kind of a climate, take full advantage of it. And if you don't, you're probably just gonna have to get yourself a dehydrator. Drying is one of the best ways to preserve your food, and it takes very little work. Just string some stuff up where they can dry and let them go. Just make sure they don't stay wet too long. If you've ever seen those chili peppers hanging up in Mexican decorations, Mexicans will take the chili peppers, open them up, slit them so they allow some of the air to pass through, and they'll hang them where they can dry out. And when they're dry and crispy, they keep for a very long time. Thanks for joining me. I hope you have a great harvest and you preserve a whole ton of it. I'll catch you next time. I'm David the Good.